Teams can hear you. Mics are on.
Okay, 1 sec. Let me just pull up the agenda. Okay, so I do believe perhaps Scott thinks this starts at 5:30, but I think I mentioned to him that it starts at 5. But let's go ahead and start up. We do have a quorum. So good evening and welcome to the monthly Burlington Electric Commission meeting. We hold these typically every second Wednesday of the month. This was shifted back a little bit so that we could ensure that the October meeting included the results from the KPMG audit. So hence the 2-week delay, and we're starting at 5 rather than 5:30 because our general manager has some NPAs that he has to go to by 7. So with that explanation, we'll start up with the first item on the agenda, which is the agenda itself. Are there any proposed edits or changes? Okay. And then after that is minutes of the September 14th, 2022 meeting. If there are any content-related edits or changes that were identified, great to raise them now. If it's just a typo or an edit, you can just shoot a note to the clerk via email. So we have 1 abstain.
Motion to approve?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. And then we will move to the public forum, which I don't know if anyone from the public is on the screen. Lori, do you know?
No, that's from KPMG.
Okay. Well, for folks who might be viewing at home at 3 a.m., you are always welcome to join us here, second Wednesday of the month, except today, or reach out to our great customer support team with Mike Kenrick at the lead, or any of the commissioners. Next up is the KPMG audit presentation. This is expected executive because we do end up usually, or every single time, having a conversation, just the commission and the auditors. This is a presentation and then a discussion and vote. And Emily, did you want to tee us off? I love the red.
Thank you.
Sure, I will just warmly welcome Scott Warnetsky and Heather Cuny from KPMG. Scott is our managing partner. Heather is the manager for our audit. And I believe they will be presenting some slides for the commission in public session, I think. And then at the appropriate time, the commission is free to move into executive session. And with that, Scott and Heather, I think you can share screen and present if you wish, or we can do that on our end, however you'd prefer to do it. Floor is yours.
Great, thanks, Emily. I think we can handle that, Heather. What do you think?
I think I can.
It's been a few years now using Teams and remote meetings, so we've become adept at this over time. But nice to see everyone today, and thank you for having us. And as Emily mentioned, my name is Scott Warnetsky. I'm the partner on the engagement for BED. And you might recall in previous years, there was another gentleman that was in front of you given this presentation, gentleman by the name of Brock Romano. And he rotated off of the engagement this year. And the reason for that is for rotation purposes within KPMG. We have rules within the firm that limits the tenure of a lead partner on a particular engagement to 10 years. So Brock has reached that time, I believe, probably through 2 roles, engagement quality control reviewing partner as well as lead partner. So that necessitated a switch within for the lead partner role, and here I am. So nice to meet everyone, but I'm thrilled to have Heather joining me here today. And Heather should be a familiar face and who has been on the engagement for many years and is quite frankly continuing and bringing that institutional knowledge along with her to the engagement. So anyway, So with that, I figured I'd start us off here on our deck and move right into the next slide there, and just reaffirm our commitment to BED, and that's providing essentially a better audit experience by focusing in on audit quality, and that's kind of what drives us every day in what we do in performing our audits. Number two is enhancing the client experience, and that includes implementation of different tools that we use in order to manage the audit. We'll say project manage the engagements, including the sharing of information and things of that nature. And that naturally will roll into productivity and being able to kind of work remotely and share with management information securely, and be able to communicate and meet throughout the entire process. So that is our continuing commitment, and we look to build upon that every year. Now, with we're going to move on into, I would say, some of the more detailed communications here, and what I'm about to talk about are some of the required communications. When I say required, they're communications that we as auditors are required to make to boards such as yourselves that oversee an entity's financial operations. So I'll run through a few things here, and then we'll get into a little bit more detail following these summarized comments. So as of today, we do have some outstanding matters you can see there listed as far as being able to complete our audit work. But for the most part, it looks like quite a few items there, but for the most part, we are very, very far along and have received most of what we need from management in order to complete the audit. So over the next couple of days, we'll be finishing these off in order to issue the financial statements. No significant or unusual transactions to report. I will maybe take this opportunity to highlight a change in accounting that occurred this year. I wouldn't say it's necessarily a significant or unusual transaction, but it's a change in the way management is looking at some renewable energy credits and the accounting for that. Within the financial statements, there is some discussion as to the change, the effect of the change, and the reason for the change. But high level is that management felt accounting for renewable energy credits on an inventory basis rather than expensing it right off the bat was more aligned to the way the business is run and the way renewable energy credits are used. So they went through a process, they being management, to document their position, to bring in some underlying accounting guidance and some industry practices. And at the end of the day, we agreed with their analysis and the desire to change the accounting for those renewable energy credits. It did have an effect on the prior year financial statements, because when doing this under the accounting standards, you would go back and restate 2021. I would say it was a minimal effect, roughly around $400,000 or so. And that, when you do see the financial statements, is disclosed in the notes. There are some corrected and uncorrected audit misstatements that Heather will get into in a little bit. And then, make you aware that there are some non-GAAP policies, and that means there are certain accounting policies that are technically not in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. But, what I'll say there is that is, not uncommon for entities of any size or any complexity. They're going to kind of run the gamut of different things, but but we've in each case have found that they are essentially inconsequential to the financial statements and do not result in any audit differences to report. So when it comes to the auditor's report, once we complete our procedures, we do expect to issue an unmodified opinion on those particular financial statements, meaning to date, we haven't seen anything that would cause us to evaluate or reevaluate what our opinion would be on the financial statements. So once we do complete the procedures, we believe that we'll be issuing an unmodified opinion. And then there have been no changes to our risk assessment or planned audit strategy that was developed back a couple months ago. So moving on to some other communications here. So when it comes to significant accounting estimates, we do evaluate those estimates and some of the inputs around those estimates. There are, I wouldn't say significant estimates when it relates to BED's financial statements. There are, some liabilities that derive from estimates, such as the pension liability and the OPEB liability and things like that, but nothing significant in relation to the overall financial statements of BED. And then finally, I'm not going to walk through everything on here, but this is where we would report other matters that were of concern to us, whether it would be any non-compliance with laws and regulations, any significant difficulties encountered during the audit, any illegal acts or fraud. So you can see here it's a bunch of no matters to report, which is, quite frankly, I'm sure what you come to expect, and what we expect to see in all of our clients, quite frankly. Moving on, Heather, please. This is a continuation of the prior slide. And again, if we had any difficulties of management, disagreements with management consulted with other accountants, things of that nature, those would be reported to you here. But as you can see, there are no matters to report. And we will note to you that we do have certain written communications with management, and that would be the engagement letter and management representation letter, which is signed prior to the release of the financial statements. And rounding us off here with some of the required communications is independence. So, we are nothing without our independence. We are independent auditors, so we take great pride in making sure that we are independent with all of our clients, including BED. So, here to report to you today that we are independent of the department. And, there's no matters to report to the department as far as independence violations or things of that nature. And just high level, we monitor that on a personal level, meaning folks with either, folks with, investments, making sure they're not investing in clients, including bonds of clients, whether it be familiar, like family employment, for example, maybe an independence issue. We monitor that, and also from a services point of view, making sure we're not providing services to an entity, an audit client such as BED, that would impair our independence. So, and there's a whole infrastructure behind that kind of tracks that and ensures that we adhere to the overall independence standards for our industry, as well as KPMG's strict independence policies. So, and then we'll round it out with some inquiries at the end here. But I think, Heather, is that your cue?
It is.
So,
it is my cue.
yeah.
Thank you, Scott.
Sure.
So this slide here just walks through our uncorrected audit misstatements. There's one misstatement that we identified, and this is related to the Moran frame note. Currently, right now, it's recorded a combination between a non-current and a current asset on the balance sheet, and with an offsetting liability to be paid in future years. And we reviewed the accounting treatment with management and noticed that, there's no current accounting treatment that's been approved by the regulator that would allow us to conclude that this should be carried on the balance sheet as an asset. So the appropriate treatment would that it would be expensed during the current year, the current period in which it was recorded. And I know we've talked with Emily about this, and she can provide some additional information relating to this and some things that the management's thinking about relating to this. It's considered an uncorrected misstatement, so management will not be correcting it. It's not a material error to the financial statements, but it is above our audit posting threshold. So we would be required to communicate that to you, as well as to attach it to management's representation letter, with them representing as well that it is not material to the financial statements as a whole. And I'm really not jumping to the end of the presentation. Sorry about that. The next slide here represents the corrected audit misstatement. And this is really just a reclassification issue. When we were reviewing the financial statements, net position is really broken out in between three elements, one being restricted with bond trustees and the other unrestricted. And what was new for the department this year was tied into the new debt issuance. So typically when you've issued your bonds, most of that is allocated to your capital assets. And so this year, however, there's a large portion of that bond, almost all of it, that's currently sitting within a construction account. It's unspent bond proceeds. And initially, when management prepared the financial statements, the bonds associated with that were included with unrestricted net assets instead of offsetting the investment amount. So this is really just a shifting between financial statement captions. Nothing changed as a result of that in totality relating to net position. But it was a large item and management has corrected this. The next
ask a
couple of
question?
slides. Yes.
If you go back 2 slides, can you explain why the determination was to not correct that, and what that means for, next year? Will it be presented differently, or?
Scott and Heather, would you like me to address that, or would you?
I think, yeah, if you want to take a shot, we spoke at length about this, so Emily can definitely talk about this.
Sure. Yeah. So as Scott just said, we, KPMG and we consulted. We plan to seek approval from the Public Utility Commission to treat the Moran frame liability as a regulatory asset. So we would still have the liability on our balance sheet, but instead of the correct way this year without the regulatory asset approval is to expense it. We're agreeing to leave it the way it is right now with the expectation that we'll receive approval to treat it as a regulatory asset. So therefore it will stay on the balance sheet and not hit expense. If the PUC denies our request, then next year, yes, it would change to expense, and then we would have another uncorrected or Scott and Heather can give me the right label, uncorrected misstatement, because it would have been reported, incorrectly in 2022, or no, help me here, please.
You'd be expense, but then be flowing in the wrong accounting period. So essentially you'd be recording a prior period expense as a current year activity. So it would almost be the reverse of this.
Right. So we'd be expensing it next year, which would be improper because we should have expensed it this year. Right. So that's why we're leaving it uncorrected, because it is our hope that it will stay on the balance sheet if the PUC approves our accounting order request. Did that answer it?
Yes, thank you. Rationale behind calling it an asset versus an expense?
Yeah, so there's this term called a regulatory asset, right? Which means it's a thing that you would otherwise have expensed, but you get regulatory accounting approval to treat it in a different way. So what we'll be filing for is a request to say, instead of taking a $950,000 hit to expense in 1 year, can we please amortize that expense over 10 years so that we have about $100,000 of expense, each year, and we just draw it out so that it doesn't affect the income statement in 1 year.
And so if they deny it, then in 3 years, you would present. So this year it would be incorrect. The next year it would also be incorrect. And in 3 years,
You'd be fine.
okay. That's where I was going.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that ask to PUC reasonable? I mean, is it something that you feel fairly confident that?
Yeah, I believe so. I mean, we haven't prepared the filing yet, right, in which we will kind of need to go through each. The PUC has rules or standards for what meets that test, and obviously we'll be reviewing each of the criteria and making sure that we have a case to make. In general, off the top of my head, I think the criteria are things like unexpected, unforeseen, not predictable, not likely to occur again, unusual, essentially, right? Which I think this would, yeah.
But if they don't accept it, then there's a big expense in that third year.
In the second, it'd be next year. Mm-hmm. Yes, that's right. Mm-hmm.
Will that wreak havoc on things?
Sorry, what?
Is that going to wreak havoc on?
Well, it'll certainly affect our net position and our net income. Yep. Mm-hmm.
But don't worry about it yet, because it hasn't happened yet.
Thank you. Heather, please keep going. Thanks for explaining that, Emily.
The next few slides, we're going to walk through some of the audit areas that we that we have performed procedures for and outline some of the procedures that we did perform in each area. So at the top of the list, we have accounts receivable and revenue. As part of our test work, we do select a sample of customer receivables to confirm their outstanding balance. We look at the accuracy of customer billings with the approved electric rates to make sure that that appears accurate. We select a sample of renewable energy credits to make sure that the revenue recorded is appropriate. And we look at the reasonableness of the EEU activity as well. And as part of that, we're looking at both the revenue and the expense side. For cash and investments, we do send third-party confirmations to your custodians for both your cash and investment balances. And that's both for your debt-related investments as well as with Transco and Velco. We do we do perform cash confirmations for those investments as well and look at the recorded dividends associated with that. And then finally, we look at the required presentation disclosures within the financial statements to make sure that they're appropriate and what needs to be disclosed has been. For expenses and inventory, we do perform some detailed procedures related to payroll expense as well as other expenses relating to the consumption and purchase of wood chips relating to the McNeil side of things. We look at overall expenses relating to purchase power as well as transmission and distribution, which aren't listed here, to make sure that those costs do appear to have existed and that they're accurately reported. For UPIS and debt, specifically starting with UPIS, we look at the roll forward from last year to this year and review for significant additions, both to what's been finalized and capitalized, as well as within construction work in progress. And we do review to make sure those additions appear reasonable, and particularly for those that have been capitalized and ready for to be depreciated, that the project was finished and that it does represent a capitalizable expense. We look at depreciation expense to make sure that it appears reasonable based upon the useful lives that are in place for those assets and consistency with prior years, given the relationship to the change in fixed assets. Similar to the investments in cash, we do confirm all outstanding debt, and we review compliance relating to the financial debt covenants for the outstanding debt. And then we review the related financial statement presentation and disclosures to make sure those are complete and accurate. For the post-retirement benefits and pensions, particularly as it relates to the pension plan, we do involve a KPMG actuary who reviews the valuation report and the different assumptions that are included within the plan to make sure that they appear reasonable and consistent with industry practice. We will be testing pension contributions, and we look at the related disclosures for both the GASB 68, which is the pension, and GASB 75, which is the OPEB benefit disclosures, which are quite lengthy and take up several pages, as I'm sure you've realized in the financial statements. Some of the other general areas, we've talked different areas about reviewing the notes in the financial statements, making sure that what's been presented is in conformity with generally accepted accounting principles as well as within industry practices. We do obtain legal letters from your external counsel as well as the city to make sure that there aren't any pending matters that could impact the amounts recorded in the financial statements or what's been disclosed. We also review for other significant commitments and contingencies through our review of our subsequent events to make sure nothing's happened after year end that should be reflected within the financial statements. One of the things we didn't talk a lot about this so far in this presentation is that the department was required to adopt GASB 87, which is the lease standard this year. Management put forth an analysis relating to their implementation of the standard and found that there really were no material leases that would cause them to modify their financial statements that has an immaterial impact. So as a result, you don't see anything within the financial statements relating to that. And then finally, as Scott had mentioned, we did review management's analysis relating to the treatment for those tier 3 credits to make sure that it appeared reasonable. As part of our audit, we do review management's overall internal controls as it relates to the financial statements and the overall entity, certain higher level controls that are in place relating to the accounting policies. During our review, there was nothing that came to our attention that would indicate any significant deficiencies or material weaknesses. And as such, we have none to report to you today. And I think that is the end of my section, and I'll turn it back over to Scott.
Great, thank you, Heather. And I'll finish this out here relatively quickly. And in front of you, you see here a slide called inquiries. And this is not something I'm going to walk through in detail, but more leave this here as something that you will see annually as questions or things to consider at the board level. And the way I like to think about it is we are making inquiries with management throughout our audit process. And maybe looking at the list below, for example, are there any significant unusual transactions? Are there subsequent events and things like that, right? So we've done that with management. We've gotten our answers from them. And, this is here for you to the extent that you might be aware of anything that has occurred at the board level that that we would need to be aware of. So not expecting anything, but nonetheless, we leave this here just as a placeholder and more as a kind of a tickler file to say, okay, there are conversations happening at the board level. Have the auditors been kind of notified about this, so on and so forth. So to the extent that there's anything here that kind of piques your interest that you want to ask us about or mention to us, certainly, feel free. But going to see this here every year, as just as a kind of a reminder, to maintain that open communication to the extent that there perhaps is something that you want to mention to us. So with that, going to move into some of our supplementary materials, Heather.
Before Heather starts up, you'll be sharing this, I trust, with us?
If we haven't already, I'm not, Emily, is that, you have the electronic version? I forgot.
Yes, I sent it to Emily last night.
Oh, okay, yes. So yes, you'll have the electronic version. So here, just leaving you with.
The print on the inquiries was pretty small for us.
I couldn't read that at all.
I can't either.
Is that any better?
I don't know.
Keep
I have a
going.
small
I'm in my
screen.
mid-50s.
A little better.
Yeah.
Have Emily. Great, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, this is not meant to be fine print. We're not attorneys, right? But anyway, yeah. So I'm going to leave you with our transparency report and impact plan. And what these are is first, our transparency report provides some detail to our clients on KPMG's efforts around audit quality and also results of recent inspections. As you probably know, we are kind of a regulated industry, if you will. We're overseen by the PCAOB. And we also undergo peer reviews within the industry. So, obviously things come of that where we have initiatives to increase our audit quality and implement different programs around that in order to basically meet the expectations of our regulators. So there's the link below that can bring you to that report and provide some information. But I think more importantly here, I wanted to share with you our 2022 impact plan. And this is new. This is new about a month, 2 or 3 ago, fairly recently. And what this is KPMG is essentially, I would say, ESG statement. And it's our goals and desires around reducing our carbon footprint, our goals and desires around increasing the diversity of our workforce. And that's our Accelerate 2025 program or initiative, I should say. In the 2022 impact plan, we'll go into some detail. I think it's like 40 or 50 pages or so about our goals and kind of what we're doing and how we're measuring ourselves against those goals and kind of where we are against those goals. So I leave this here for you. There's a link there. Once you get the electronic version, you can click on it and it'll take you to that report to let you know kind of what we're doing around those broad areas. So with that, I guess that is the end of the presentation. And I guess if there are any questions, we'd be happy to answer them at this time.
Thank you. Do any commissioners have questions that they feel are acceptable for public viewing?
I know I ask this question every time, but I think the public would be potentially interested. What is the largest discrepancy that might have persisted through your analysis?
I mean, I think, so when you say discrepancy, I mean, we measure, we have certain measures as far as when we identify and report discrepancies. So for us, a discrepancy is an audit misstatement, and that is something that through our procedures, we have found that the financial statements presented to us were essentially incorrect, right? So that's what when you say discrepancy, that's what I think of. And we reported to you here today kind of what those discrepancies are. As our the AICPA auditing standards, which is what we follow in conducting this audit, require us to report to you anything that we identify above a certain level. So that is what has been reported to you today. So I think, as far as your question, what's the largest, it would be kind of what has been reported in this presentation.
Well, let me put it a different way.
Okay.
If anybody stole any money, how large would it have to be detected by what you've done?
So when we perform our audit, it's in order to perform reasonable assurance on the financial statements. We're not performing our procedures to guarantee absolute assurance. So is there are there immaterial items rolling around there that we don't look at? I would say yes, right? So we have in our audits this concept of materiality, which we will set a monetary level at which we consider things to be immaterial, and then below that would be above that would be material, below that would be immaterial. So our procedures are, and that level is designed in order to ensure that we meet that standard of reasonable assurance. So oftentimes we get this question when it comes to fraud, right? So there are two types of fraud. There's financial statement fraud, which is kind of manipulation of results in the financial statements. And then there's also misappropriation of assets, right? Someone, with their hand in the till, if you will, right? So I would say generally, that misappropriation of assets, the cashier with their hand in the till, for example, we don't design our procedures to kind of uncover that, because those are very, very small to a particular set of financial statements. Now, that would be obviously operationally something that would be very, very, that folks would be very interested in. But in order for us to opine on the financial statements, that is something that is very, very small to the financial statements. So when it comes to fraud, we design our procedures to uncover perhaps, any of the, uncover things that would materially affect the financial statement, as that is generally going to be kind of manipulation of results. So I know, long kind of winded answer there as far as kind of what we look at and what we don't look at, but hopefully that clarifies things.
Yeah. Fair enough. In the deathless world of truth, the answer would have been a single number, but okay.
Okay.
I'm happy.
Any other comments or questions? I wanted to ask, Brock spent a little bit of time with me last year. We went through this. And one of the things that he had mentioned was, and this is a little different from financial statements, but just the, how critical it is, which we've already discussed in the past, but for boards such as these, for municipal utilities to really be focusing on cybersecurity, that sort of thing. I recognize that's not financial statement review, but just thought since he's not here any longer, I thought I would just sort of ask whether or not you had any perspectives like that in terms of what we should be really keeping an eye on, besides your long list of inquiries, which we can't read.
I know. Heather, would you mind stop sharing, by the way, so I can
Oh,
get the
sorry.
full screen? But I think there are certainly a lot of things boards can think about, and cybersecurity certainly is one of them. And that is something that, quite frankly, through the audit, we do make some inquiries, and we do we do determine whether there are events or incidents that would affect the financial statements. But at the same time, I think it's that is kind of something that is outside of the financial statements, and I think should be ingrained within the organization itself, because there are you have a lot of different there are different systems within the entity that are not financial related and that we're not necessarily interested in. And as a public utility, I mean, obviously you have systems that are running your operations, right, that are just outside the financial realm. And when it comes to cybersecurity, that is something that, I would hope is, top of mind, to the organization, and ensuring that you have the different processes and controls in place to ensure that you're fending off any potential attacks and things like that. Honestly, in my view, when it comes to like a public utility or any utility for that matter, cybersecurity around the general ledger system is not nearly as important as is around the the infrastructure and the operations, quite frankly.
Right. And then I just have one other question, which is we made a modification maybe 4 years ago. Jim Reardon wanted to make sure that some of the reporting that was done on like pieces of paper for materials and supplies, that we had a better checks and balance system. And I know there were modifications to that, but you didn't mention it, so I'm assuming it's all taken care of. But is this ringing a bell, Darren? Or
inventory cycling? Yes. You could speak to it more specifically.
Yes. So I do recall this. It was right when I joined BED, and following Jim's passing, the team put together an inventory procedure, and we worked with General Services, who performs the inventory count, to sort of review all the procedures, update the document. So we went through kind of a months-long, actually, kind of internal review of the inventory procedures. Former finance director Andrea McNeil was involved in that when she joined, and that has become the basis of the new process memo that we share. We share a number of memos, basically documenting how we do things with KPMG as part of the support we provide for their testing and procedures. And so that inventory procedure is one of those now. And so I would say, going forward, we, KPMG asks for, and we provide, annual inventory reports and any information or testing or sampling that they wish to perform, we respond to. And so.
So I guess my question is,
Yes.
since nothing was identified, it seems like that procedural change has addressed what was identified maybe 5 years ago. But so that's good.
Say, yeah.
Any other comments or suggestions? Otherwise, the last page, thank you very much to our clerk. The last page of your packet, there is some language so that we can shift into executive session if someone wants to pull it up.
I move to find that premature general public knowledge of KPMG's evaluation of BED's management with the commission would clearly place the Burlington Electric Department at a substantial disadvantage per Title I, Section 313, subsections A1 and A3 of the Vermont state statutes, because such information may risk contractual relationships with BED counterparties in the regular sale and purchase of energy, and is considered an evaluation of BED personnel.
Second.
All in favor?
Do I have to read the next one too? Okay. I move that the commission enter into executive session to discuss the KPMG information with the commission under the provisions of Title I, Section 313, subsections A1A of the Vermont statutes.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
are we going to a different room?
Yeah, we'll go into a different zone.
And if you can
Yes.
turn the mic off and everything, stop recording. We will be back.
Time. Thank you.
So you'll let us know when you're back up and running? Okay. Thank you. We have closed out of executive session and provided the information of the vote to our clerk. And thank you both very much for the time and also the work to review. And thank you very much to Emily for getting everything over and, continuing to man woman the ship with incoming and outgoing staff. So thank you. We were joking that none of you management are allowed to quit or get hit by a bus. End of story. So we did have a helpful conversation, and I don't believe we have any further discussion on this, so we do need someone to make a motion.
I move to accept the KPMG audit report.
In a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
I'm sorry, who seconded?
Bob.
Thank you.
I do have a question, though. This is before the final report has been submitted. When does it come?
The financial statements?
Your report.
Oh, our opinion? So I think it's going before the board. Emily, I think there's a date. Is it the next board meeting?
Yes, I will be presenting the audited financial statements to you all at your November 9th meeting. Is that your question, Commissioner Herendeen?
No, it's KPMG's report to us. As I understood it, we're approving what seems to be coming, but it actually has not come yet. Is that correct?
The presentation that they gave tonight?
The audited financials will include their
letter.
piece of it as well.
Okay. Got it.
Right. And we expect, you will receive it in your packet for the November 9th meeting. And we expect and hope to issue the statements by Friday.
But you're right, that was not the full report. That was the highlighted summary of the report. And
is that all right? Is it all correct, Scott and Heather?
Yeah, I would consider this our formal communications to the board, right, which we're required to make to the board. The actual opinion on the financial statements will be issued, I would say very shortly, so it'll be in the packet that you see. But I think the purpose of this meeting, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, was to give you our formal kind of, presentation on the results, which is what we did.
so Commissioner Herendeen's point is perhaps we should not have just made that motion until next month.
No.
Okay. It sounds like not much will change, but we will get the report. And Lori, if you, as we talked about, if you could just make sure. Oh, okay. So they did just, Lori did just send us the PowerPoint that was presented tonight to our emails.
Yep. And maybe just on that point, you mentioned the things changing. So if there were things to change between now and when we issue the financial statements, we would communicate that to you separately as well. So just to make that point.
Okay. Thank you both. Have a good evening.
Yes, thank you.
All right. You too. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So next on the agenda is the Commissioner's Corner. So this is for folks at home. This is a discussion opportunity for commissioners to raise anything that perhaps is not in the agenda, but that we wish to raise. Does anyone have anything besides me that they want to raise?
Thanks for the Net Zero Energy Festival. That was a super success, and you may talk about that too. But I enjoyed it, and so did my wife.
Great band. That band was great. That singer. Sorry.
And also, thank you for my award last time. It got me out of doing the dishes for one night.
Yeah, I want to second Bob that on that festival. That was a really good time, and for those who were there, I'm sure everyone got their fill of it and got a full dose of information on EV and everything electrification, and that was really cool and well done. Kudos to Adam and his group. Also, the employee appreciation lunch was really nice and were well received, and that was really cool. I didn't know if my neighbor had come in, I'd come in a little bit late, if she had gone on earlier, if you had any public comment or anything. But my next door neighbor has totally redone they have an electric car, they've done the whole thing. They've got your sign in front of their house with every box checked.
Nice.
Pretty much. But she was supposed to come on tonight and want to raise concerns, and you and I briefly discussed it. I was hoping maybe we could have a brief about the quality of utility to the house when you make these upgrades, not being, whatever that service level is.
Right.
She brought that up as being a hindrance to some folks in going electric with heat pumps and such, and doing those things. And that being a problem, because that ends up, I think, being on the customer's part, and that can be more, it can be a detriment to going full electric in your house and that sort of thing.
Mike, first on the Net Zero Festival, thank you both, and thank you for everybody joining us for that. What's the date? Save the date, 2023. We already have a take two in 2023.
Coming right up.
I think it's September 23rd.
It is September 23rd.
Okay, so
23rd in 23.
September 23rd of 2023. We'll be looking to have our second event. We're going to try to make it bigger, better, even more engagement with the community. But we were really grateful for the turnout, grateful for the opportunity to talk with customers and see people enjoying these technologies, learning about them. Great music, great food, all of that. In terms of the conversation, and this may be of interest to Commissioner Shagnon as well, given his background in permitting issues. What we've learned, and I think is a live issue and is going to be a big issue over time, is that, the 100 amp to 200 amp service, if you're putting in a heat pump, putting in EV charging, we've had some conversations with the city around that in terms of permitting, like whether it's a requirement going forward or is it something that's recommended, because you could get to a point where you're putting these things in and you have enough at any given time, but if everything was being used all at once, you might have a situation where the service really wasn't able to accommodate it. There's some technology solutions, at least for EVs. We had a company through the Delta Climb Business Accelerator called DCC, and they have essentially a collar that can go around the charger and make sure that you're not using everything else at the same time you're trying to pull charging. Not aware of anything like that for heat pumps yet. And the one thing that I did want to mention, and we'll be tracking, is the state, Commissioner Stebbins knows about this, is putting $20 million in federal funds towards supporting panel upgrades as part of a broader electrification effort. So once those funds are available, I think there's some income limitations around them. We're going to be trying to make sure our customers know about it, because that'll be a great opportunity if you're thinking about an EV, a heat pump, to get that panel upgrade handled. Because we're talking thousands, or in some cases could be even $10,000+ of work, and that can be a real barrier to people taking the steps that we're encouraging here. Yeah.
Anything else? Anyone? No. I also loved the event, and so did my daughters, so thank you. So I just wanted to give an update to everybody. At the last meeting, we did spend a bit of time on the street lighting discussion, and I don't believe you were present, so I did say that I would reach out to someone who is an energy lighting expert, and that I'd also connect with you, Jim, and then I'd connect with the rest of you to get a sense of where things fell. I did do all those things, and the update is essentially in terms of finding an expert. We actually have an energy lighting expert who lives in the south end of Burlington, and while he does not feel like spearheading a large stakeholder initiative over 3 years with volunteers, everyone saying what they would like, more light, less light, he does not feel like doing that. He is more than happy to have a couple of meetings. He actually just walked along Richardson last night and have a couple of meetings and sort of talk through some of the nuances from his perspective that he sees in the IES standards, in terms of the number of conflicts, in terms of whether the lumens are at 3,000 or 2,200, and what some other cities and nations, particularly in Europe, are doing. So that is something that I've mentioned to both the general manager as well as Munir just before the meeting. Thanks, Munir. And I know that we are down several staff. So Munir, hopefully when you have time, maybe in the next 3 to 4 weeks, if you have an hour here or there, we could find some time that could work for you, any of your engineers, that should be invited to that conversation, given that Andy has left, myself and this expert, and we could sort of kind of look at whether or not there were any other nuances that we could have looked into in terms of the IES standards, just for the short term. So wondering if that would be an okay initial next step. I have a few other ideas, but.
Let me check though. You said this would not be a presentation to us.
No, this is more a discussion of, this person is a national expert. He basically looks at lighting, in many, many different scenarios from an energy efficiency and safety perspective, et cetera. And it's just always following and reading all of the trends specifically to lighting. So it was more just okay, what are we doing? How are we interpreting the IES standards? And how is this other person who this is what he lives and breathes 24/7 interpret it? And is there room there to still be within the standards, to address some of the concerns, that we've heard from our legal counsel, but perhaps also recognize that it's a big difference what the community is going through, and whether or not it's the level of lighting is needed. So basically to try and get a sense of, from this other individual, since he is an expert and he happens to live in the south end of Burlington, what he sees, and to have sort of more of just a conversation with sort of the technical experts, not a presentation, although if any of you commissioners would want to come, happy to have you join. I'm thinking it's more probably within the 9 to 5 hours of your normal workday. That's what I was thinking.
That was actually where my question was going, because I would like to.
Great. And if anyone else wants to come, you're more than welcome. We just have to do public notice, and you can just let us know. So that's okay if whenever you happen to have a spare hour?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, with all the vacant positions right now, I'm trying to see what's the best time that would work. As you know, I'm covering right now directly for the Director of Engineering, Director for Grid Service, Director of Engineering of Generation, and now the Chief of Field Services. Last day is this Friday. So I'm going to be tapped there too. And also one of the engineer staff is going to be leaving on 4 weeks leave. So I don't know if November would be a good month. I would say maybe the first week of December. Sure. Somewhere around there, we can probably schedule a meeting here. Sure. If that should work.
Yep.
Let me know who should be in this meeting. We can send the invite.
Okay, great. And then the other piece, so I did drive around last night at 9:30. I actually think I was freaking some people out because I didn't have my lights on, because I was trying to see really what it was like. And yeah, so I looked a little odd at 9:30 at night, but kept turning my car on, turning it off because the lights kept, anyway, long story short, I was just trying to get a sense of what the, real lived experience is of this. And it is pretty strikingly different. There is one street that is Morse Place, which I would say is, it looks like it doesn't have any lights. It looks like, you're maybe in, the Northeast Kingdom in some forest, there's like one light. It's really dark. And then there are like Ferguson, Lyman is sort of medium-ish, some lights. And that's sort of what most of them are like. And then the two streets that have been updated, Richardson and then Scarf, are really, really bright. And that's even with the difference. And I guess I just for the record, having actually gone out there, I can understand why, the neighbors would be like, was this much necessary? So hence why I wanted to take the time to have that conversation with the expert. Because it's a significant difference. And it's not just the number of poles. It's also that if you think about it, they had lights probably in there that were like 25 years old. So those have degraded over time. So even if you just replaced the light bulb, it would have seemed brighter, let alone adding in all those other factors. So with that, I would like to make sure that we don't just move on with lighting Lyman according to our current plans until we've actually looked at this a bit more. I am worried that that we're going to end up going down the same path, which is really to take a street that's sort of medium lit right now and just kind of make it like very, 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 I mean, it's really quite bright. So I know that Munir had said he's good with sort of postponing the lighting part to spring. I'd like to just say, if it's possible, I'd really like to not have us be putting in all these lights if we're still having this conversation.
And the only challenge I would speak to on that, I agree that it would be very helpful to have a conversation, very helpful to engage and ensure that people have a clear understanding of what we're doing and why, and they have an opportunity to engage with us. And if there are things we can do that we've kind of done ahead of time, that we've done, after the fact, that will be helpful too, in terms of, if this pole is right outside my window, or can it be angled this way, or can we use different fixtures? I think we want to have that conversation ahead of time. The only challenge for us is, because it's part of our capital budget and because materials are challenging at the moment, and there's this standard that basically says when you do the work on the street, you're supposed to do this. Postponing beyond spring could be challenging. I think waiting until spring makes good sense, but if we got to that point, we didn't have consensus, we'd either have to violate our own standard or do something else. I don't know what. So that's the only thing I just wanted to flag.
I hear that. I also just think, and I hear that concern, and hopefully we can figure this out before so that we don't hit that. But honestly, I do not think the South End neighbors want the entire neighborhood to look like Richardson and Scarf. And I think we will just end up hearing that. We'll end up hearing quite a bit from a lot of people if we do that to Lyman and Morse and Ferguson and all of the other streets. So, and it's a lot of money, and it, putting in poles that, I don't know, folks should go and drive around, take a look, just see how bright it is. And I do hear the concerns. I recognize that. Again, the standards are recommendations. And the trick is, how can we, the trick is, if we're going to do something else differently, how do we identify that, and how do we make sure that that's something reliable? So, but in the interim, we will hold off until spring. We'll have this meeting. We'll see where that goes, and we definitely need you to have a director of engineering.
Yeah, just to clarify, we're gonna start if the weather is nice, we're gonna start the electrical installations, but we're holding off on the lighting until the spring, because there's two separate things.
So can you explain the
electrical wires to the houses, is it gonna be fed from different places?
Yep.
We may not be able to hold off until the spring, depending on what the line crews have for workload.
Right. So like these lines that go from, I'm talking about.
This one is mostly underground, so really it's going to be going in from the pole in the conduits to a handhold, and then from the handhold it's going to go, there's transformers in the utility hole, then it's going to go to each of the houses underground to feed their service, and we're going to remove their service from the existing, wires, aerial wires from behind the houses. So that piece we're going to have to start doing.
Yep.
And I have to check with obviously, I haven't get into the drawing of the project yet, but I will get there. I'll take a look at it this week or next week to see if we can. I believe there's, I don't know, 1 or 2 street lighting right now, to see how we're going to keep them on, while we're removing the existing infrastructure.
Yes. Electrical moving forward, lighting, not yet.
I know you mentioned, the brightness of the light stuff. I mean, is it considered unsafe? Or is it just considered that it's too bright because they're not used to it? I mean, I think we have to look at the safety factor. I mean, I know I've been on all these streets and driven on all these streets, and, you know, I'd rather see somebody walking on a sidewalk, be able to see somebody walking on a sidewalk and coming across an intersection than not see him. You know, and have that capability. I know it's a fine line, but I think we really have to keep that in mind, is that safety factor. I really do. I mean,
I agree with you.
It's like anybody getting to adjust to the brightness of it and get used to it, but.
I agree with you. I guess I'd say if you're a driver, I mean, cars have headlights. And so that is ideally why you would see a pedestrian walking.
Well, I don't agree with that.
You don't agree with that?
No, I don't agree with that, because I had an intersection in Colchester just last night that way. Was not lit. The intersection wasn't, came onto it with my truck, gray headlights, brand new truck.
Yeah.
And I didn't see the person until I was on top of them, and they're in dark clothes. So the headlight things, yeah, if my headlights are going towards the sidewalk, I'm going to see them. But hopefully I'm not going towards the sidewalk. I'm staying on the road.
Right.
You know what I mean? So I
Yeah.
mean, I just think I think we really have to look
It's
at the
tough.
safety factor. Of,
Yeah.
Is it, you know, is the brightness unsafe? I went on, I don't think it is, but I mean, that's just my opinion.
Well, I think that's the other piece that this expert mentioned, is that he keeps seeing more and more reports about how if areas are overly lit at night, that it impacts human sleep, and therefore it leads to human health issues. So that's what a lot of other cities and states and nations are starting to grapple with. So hence why I just, for me, I'd like to hear a little bit more about, to your point, the conflict, like that is one of the nuances in the IES standards. It's what level of conflict might there be in terms of number of pedestrians, number of cars, that sort of thing.
Let me chime in. I think getting info from the expert as early as we can, subject to constraints, is a good idea. In the longer term, I sent a note around a while ago about how we had to have a mission statement, and maybe that was the wrong term because I didn't mean something that was only, 17 words long, but a position, maybe that's it. And it's going to cover all these issues and more, I would think. And it's a real spaghetti nest. So, but if we don't sort it out, it'll blow up in our faces before we even start. I think we have to do that in the medium term if we're going to do anything.
Agreed. And that's why I was sort of, throwing out there that I'd like to have this conversation and try and figure this out, which is a compressed timeline, but before spring, when, or delay Lyme until after spring. But I understand that then you run into other issues. So
Can I just clarify something? So when you say a mission statement, you mean like a policy directive?
Well,
that we're setting lighting to accomplish these goals or to balance things in this way?
Okay, thank you for asking. I'm afraid mission statement was an improper description. I would think of it more as a position statement. Why are we pursuing this? Why do we think lighting is important, and why are we pursuing a policy that might make a lot of changes, and which will bump up against things like safety versus dark skies, safety versus sleep, ecological health, human health, all of that stuff. So I'm afraid it's getting bigger all the time, and I hope it doesn't get too big, but it's some position of why we would like to do stuff about light versus nothing.
Well, it seems to me what's going to be the crux of your conversation is that balance between an IES or whatever the standard that has some ambiguity to it, but we want to stay in there legally and protect ourselves, at the same time balancing that out with the aesthetics of what is, reasonably too bright, not bright, right there in the middle of Goldilocks, and trying to bring those two things into balance with each other, I think, is hopefully the goal of what that discussion is going to be.
Just want to clarify too, is we are designing the streets in the residential area to meet the local streets, which has the low pedestrian activities, because there's 3 different classifications. One is for high, medium, and low, and we are designing it to the low, and the same thing on the sidewalks. And this is the lowest you can find in the IS standards for residential streets.
Yeah, and the other areas, the determination of the conflict level, those are some of the pieces that this individual said, this is how I've heard it viewed, analyzed, assessed, and, this is sort of the range. So, being mindful that it's 6:16, I wanted to give you an update. And I know you have to get to an NPA meeting.
The NPA meeting we were scheduled to join, we had to postpone. So
okay.
I apologize. I know we had that time constraint. We were planning to present on the charter change proposal and it wasn't quite ready. So we're going to the NPAs, but it's going to be probably mid-November to kind of like early December. So apologies for starting early when we could have otherwise. This was a late breaking development.
So we can go till 9.
Please. Lori will stay as long as you like. Now that's a look.
I'm old. Anyway, that was my update. I promised to follow up. I'm glad that we have this expert in town who, if I get my dreams granted, he'll figure out everything for us and we'll be fine. I doubt that'll be the case, but we're going to kick the ball to the next point, which will be maybe the first week of December. And thanks again for your flexibility. I know Burlington Electric would prefer someone else to take this challenge on, but I appreciate both of you guys working on this. And yeah, way too few engineers. Okay. Thank you, Munir. And did your team do something to the light fixture outside my house? I swear they did. Something seems dimmer.
Yes.
I love it. Thank you.
He hasn't gotten to my house yet, but I'm waiting.
I love it. Thank you. I'm like, wow.
Oh, you love it now. Okay, wait a minute.
It's dimmer. No, it's dimmer.
Oh, it's dimmer, okay.
Just-
You gotta reposition.
That'll
this
cool her
upstairs
off.
into the window.
No, that's what it's been for 12 years. Okay. Thank you, Munir.
All right,
And
and
to your team.
a compliment to Gabrielle. She became a investigative reporter and tracked down some interesting stuff. Good work.
Thanks. Lucky that I happen to work in the industry and I happen to know some energy lighting people, but anything else in Commissioner's Corner? Otherwise, no. Okay, so next agenda item is the GM update. And wow, we have some 4 doozies at the top, don't we?
Yeah.
We do. So James is off today, but I think in the next meeting, November meeting, we'll have an agenda item to talk more about the winter. There's really 2 challenges at play. There's reliability and there's pricing. The reliability challenge is significant enough that ISO New England has entered into this contract to keep a liquefied natural gas tanker parked outside of a combined cycle power plant in Massachusetts and wants to keep that tanker full to the point that they used natural gas from that tanker, I understand, in July and August, which is not the winter, obviously. And we've received pro rata share charges for that. Beyond $100,000 in charges, unbudgeted and unplanned for, so that they could bring in a more full tanker to sit there as we enter the winter. Just to me, that's the most dramatic kind of realization of how challenging the New England reliability issue is in the winter. And just to recap, it's, we have a significant amount of natural gas capacity in terms of power plants, but when the winter comes, a lot of that gas, pipeline gas, is being used for thermal, for heating, for other applications. We don't have enough to run all the power plants in New England. And so you have constraints. They're bringing on, when coal runs in New England, that tends to be, during that period, oil, fired generation. Certainly for us, we run McNeil heavy in the winter, as you all are aware, because the prices tend to be high, but that also helps to displace our reliance in the region on natural gas by having McNeil. But it's a severe challenge. It's persisted for a number of years. The solutions that have been discussed, none of have been implemented in a meaningful way. Offshore wind is at scale, could be a help, but it seems to always be a few years off. And there's nothing kind of immediate there. Bringing in a large amount of hydro from Canada, there hasn't been support for a particular transmission route, and there are some who would oppose that on other grounds. And then there's no interest, I think, which we would share, that lack of interest in bringing more natural gas pipelines into New England. So we're left with this challenge. So on the one hand, it's a reliability challenge. We don't expect, there's a very low likelihood of having a severe reliability event, but in the event of a significant multi-day cold snap, that's not out of the question. And there's certainly been some planning around that with the utilities and Velco and ISO New England. On the other hand, the cost side is what we're really focused on, where we have these unbudgeted, charges, as every utility in the region does, from ISO New England for this tanker program that they've implemented for this winter and next winter. And then we don't know what that's going to look like when it actually hits December, January, February, and they're really going through liquefied gas there. On the other hand, it makes running McNeil 24/7 in the winter. We got our McNeil team here, as important as ever. Prices are fluctuating. The forwards were up, they're down a little bit. They may come back up. But our budget certainly relies to a heavy extent on McNeil performing a strong winter run and prices being reasonably high, because that's what we had a projection for in the budget. So those are variables and risks that we see. And James will give a fuller, detailed presentation, but I didn't want to let the opportunity go by without at least mentioning it. And we'll dig in more in November. Happy to answer questions if there are any now.
So I have a question. BED doesn't use natural gas.
Correct.
So how come we have to pay?
So this is the whole thing of being connected to the regional grid, is even though we don't use it and it's not for our customers, we still pay reliability charges and we still pay capacity charges. So we're still connected, unless we want to island Vermont or island Burlington, which may be compelling in certain respects. But being connected to the grid, they can charge the utilities for these winter reliability programs. A few years ago, they were paying to keep oil on hand at specific plants, and there were charges related to that I'm sure were passed through as well. Yeah, so it's the difference between what's in our portfolio versus, being part of the grid itself.
Of the overall network.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
This is an amazing question. All of the utilities that are part of this don't have a say in these decisions that are made at this level. Where we go, whoa, wait a minute, we don't need no tanker.
I mean, there's significant concern, I think, among the utilities about this, and how much transparency there is into what was negotiated and what the pricing is. And there was supposed to be a meeting, and James will probably give you more details. There was supposed to be a market participants meeting where ISO New England was going to give more details on it. There's definitely other ways to have recourse, through FERC and elsewhere on these types of things. But at the end of the day, ISO New England says, hey, we're charged with reliability, and this is our option. And ISO New England has pointed out, somewhat pointedly, that state policies moving us towards more renewables are leaving them with a more challenging situation in terms of reliability, because what they like is dispatchable resources that can ramp up and down. And right now, that's natural gas is what they look at as the major resource. And, we've retired nuclear plants in the region that tended to run 24/7. There's pressure, as you all know, which we certainly don't agree with, but there's pressure on the biomass plants, Rygate and McNeil. There's folks as part of a biomass task group of the Climate Council who would like to place limitations on those plants, which I think is not appropriate given where we are, and given that the replacement for that is very clearly burning more natural gas, which we don't support. So yeah, there's challenges there in terms of the transparency, in terms of the program, but at the end of the day, they also do have that responsibility, and that's why they're taking that step. I don't like it or enjoy the fact that Burlington customers have to pay for that. That's not something that that's not aligned well with where we are. Yeah.
But BED stands to make money by selling the power from McNeil.
If the prices are strong, we will definitely, because we have an excess position, we would definitely benefit, presuming McNeil is able to run, and all of our other resources are running at projected levels. We have an outage at McNeil. I was able to visit. Paul took me around for check out the grates, the new and old grates that are being replaced, which was one of the issues we were running into over I think it was the summertime, right? Where we would have these great challenges when we were running. We're planning to start up probably in November. We've been stockpiling wood. Betsy and her team doing a great job in terms of procurement, James and his team working with them, and Paul and Rodney and the whole group to make sure we have enough wood and that we are ready to go in November. And if something goes wrong when we go to start up, we'll have a little bit of time to get things right before we really hit the high price period. Yeah. It's going to be
I
historic.
noticed, Emily, you attended a FERC New England Winter Gas Electric Forum. Wonder if there was any discussion about that, or was that a helpful forum, or?
I mean, I think all of the issues that Darren just outlined were discussed. It was a meeting of the FERC commission, so it was their meeting, their agenda. their panel, invited panelists whom they questioned, and a full crowd audience, listening in at the Hilton. Not an easy problem to solve immediately, right? For all the reasons Darren just mentioned.
Well, and your term immediately, I mean, all of these projects take a lot of time if it's whichever you want, if it's offshore wind or if it's a pipeline from Canada. I mean, none of these are flip the switch.
And it's also probably, as we increase electrification, right, it's exacerbating that problem of production.
Right. I mean, we really have to think about winter production. That's where I think that some of the conversation at a very general level, we want more solar, we want more wind to meet electrification. Great, and we support that, but that doesn't necessarily help this winter challenge purely. So we need to think about the resources that can come online in the winter, and we have McNeil, we have, Rygate in Vermont. Offshore wind might have a better winter profile than solar, for example. Hydro from Canada would have a better profile, I think, than, some other resources. So the probable answer is we need all of that. And then some, because we're still heavily reliant on fossil fuels in the New England grid. And to get there at scale, we probably need everything in, all of those solutions that we talked about coming online in the winter.
If the, like the electrification of the heat pumps, things like that, that's reducing the use of gas for thermal, right?
Correct.
And it could be available for.
That is possible. I think we'd see a higher winter peak on the electric side. It's possible it could reduce on the gas side, and whether that nets out on a kind of BTU basis, interesting to look at. Electric is heat pumps are more efficient generally, I think, than looking at burning at 80% efficiency in a boiler. So there could be a beneficial delta in some respect there.
Heat pumps are like 2.3 to 2.8 efficiency levels compared to like an 80 or 90% furnace or boiler.
Right.
But I mean, it also argues that the one thing that we haven't talked about is the demand response and the energy efficiency, which is why the time of use rate for EVs is,
right.
All of that, and the exploration into storage, where all of that, it really matters. But
Agreed.
Boy.
So there's that. Legislative issues we're engaging as we move up towards the session. The things that we're kind of keeping an eye on. I think we're supportive of the efforts to have a clean heat program of some sort that would help move the heating fuel dealers and providers more in the direction of renewables. That may come back this year. We'll certainly do what we can to support that. Doesn't directly affect us necessarily in terms of our utility, but it'll probably have a role to play in supporting VGS's direction as they're trying to move towards more climate programs. The thing that is a concern, I think the two things that are a concern are if there were changes to the renewable energy standard that were disadvantageous to us, or if there were efforts to disadvantage McNeil. And ironically, I find this challenging. This biomass task group is proposing restrictions that could limit our ability to do district energy, which is just the opposite of what a climate focused effort would want. We would want district energy, in my view, regardless of your view of McNeil as a whole, because it makes the plant more efficient. It decarbonizes a significant amount in Burlington. And the discussions, and there was one today and there are more coming, and this is just a task group that would report up to a climate council that would make recommendations perhaps to the legislature or the administration. So there are many steps along that process, and we'll certainly weigh in with our thoughts. But if there were efforts to restrict district energy, which we're still actively working on, we have a meeting next week with VGS to go over some pricing issues. We have the Evergreen team in town next week working on kind of completing some of the engineering and design work. And we had a first meeting of the 501c3 board that is going to govern the Evergreen process, which I've reluctantly been named president of. And Neil is on it with us, as well as Catherine Schad from the city and Megan Tuttle from the city as placeholders for what would ultimately be customer seats on the board if the medical center, UVM, or others join up. So that effort continues apace. We still have challenges there, but we certainly wouldn't want to see restrictions placed on district energy by the Climate Council or the legislature. And then in terms of renewable energy standard, we're already over 100% renewable. Our hope would be that state law continues to recognize that and doesn't put provisions in that would limit the use of our existing resources or require us to buy more expensive renewables to replace the renewables we already have. That's probably at least a 2-year conversation from what I understand. The Department of Public Service is doing a multi-month engagement process that'll probably last well beyond the current upcoming legislative session. But I anticipate there'll be conversation around it. Some environmental groups are talking about trying to ban biomass renewable credits from counting in Vermont, which would also be, I think, a very negative message in our view. We don't necessarily always utilize those for our compliance here because they're worth more in other markets for the time being. But we've talked with the commission, and continues to be my view, that as those markets converge and pricing in Vermont gets closer to pricing in Connecticut or New Hampshire, we would, all things equal, love to use those credits here. And the price for tier 1 RECs, which is what we use for our own compliance, has increased from, like, I think it was 1/10 of a cent, well up to over a cent now. So a really exponential increase, given that there are a lot of utilities now that are procuring these credits in Vermont. So it's not unthinkable that over a several-year period, you would have a convergence where our market and their market might line up to the point that you would say, okay, we'll retire the McNeil RECs for Burlington. So I wouldn't want to see a change that would limit us from doing that.
1/10 to a penny, over what time frame was that?
Probably like a 2 to 3 year period. Yeah, it really did ramp up. So the movement is in the direction you would want to see in order for those to align eventually. And the pricing in other markets has actually kind of stabilized / come down. And so the delta is still there. There's still a benefit to our customers to sell as opposed to use here, but it's a less of a delta than it used to be. And it's the directional movement means we could potentially use McNeil RECs at some point, which I would love to do for Burlington.
Comparison, our number for selling is like 0.5 cent.
When we sell, it would be like, it's still probably like 3 cents versus a little over 1 cent. So there's still a pretty decent delta there. Or James would use megawatt. I'm using kilowatt, so he would say $30 versus, $11 per megawatt hour. I always use kilowatt hour for some reason. I don't know, because state law uses that, but James uses megawatt hour. So those are things we'll watch and we'll engage on. Brief note of thanks to Commissioner Moody for joining us at the appreciation lunch for employees at McNeil. We loved having you. We had a great time outdoors, lucky for the season that we got good weather, little windy. Lori helped us organize. We had a lot of folks who joined us from McNeil and also from Pine Street to recognize employees who had served up to 40 years of service for Greg Thayer and 35 for Cheryl Mitchell. And then for newer folks like myself, it was our 5-year anniversary. So yes, it was a good time. And lastly, this IBEW pension retro issue, another really interesting one. So I think we've discussed this with the commission previously. There had been an arbitration result that had led to a forward liability and a lump sum retroactive liability based on conversations we had had with the city attorney and the city back in this time of year last year. We had an agreement to share the retroactive cost pro rata. So BED was paying around $435,000 of it, and the total is about $1.3 million. We've paid, as of last year, we had paid $100,000 towards it. We have another $150,000 in our current year budget that was scheduled to be paid for it. And then we got a kind of notice a few weeks ago from the city that they were looking at this again, and that they think that there is assertion that BED might owe the entire amount. They had retained outside counsel who had worked with us on the arbitration to look into this. I believe other departments may have pushed back on the portion of their budget that was being affected by this, and that was what raised the issue. And there may have been a lack of clear communication to those departments during their budget season about this. So there's some moving pieces here. We've noted in the audit a footnote, I believe, correct, that expresses that there could be a reopening of this issue. We had previously gotten PUC approval to treat as a regulatory asset this $435,000. If this is reopened, we'll have to get new accounting treatment at the PUC. And also we would need some sort of repayment plan from the city that was a number of years in length in order not to impact our kind of annual projections in a meaningful way. So this is a challenging issue. I continue to engage on it, as does our team. And I don't know what the outcome will be as of right now, but we'll keep the commission updated. Certainly material costs, so we wanted to raise it with you as soon as we knew about it, but we don't know the outcome yet.
Are 100% of the IBEW employees FEED?
Yes, that's accurate. There's kind of a discussion around that issue of like who caused the liability, which is IBEW employees, BED employees, but how would the fund have treated it? You know, because we're part of a fund. What we had asked is, was there a policy, a written policy or a precedent that we could point to? This was at this time last year. It's actually a little before this time last year. When we were going into our rate case, we had said, is there a policy, written policy or precedent we can point to? Because initially the city attorney had said, we think it's all going to be your responsibility. And we needed that for the rate case to be able to say, okay, we need the accounting treatment. We need to show why it's our responsibility because we're part of a fund. It's not just BED employees, it's all Class B, which is school district, DPW, all these different employees. And at the time, they had not identified a written policy or precedent over a multi-month process that went through 3 different city attorneys because there was turnover at the time from Eileen Blackwood. Justin St. James was acting, and then we had Dan Richardson. And it was Dan earlier in his tenure that had finally made the decision that it should be shared pro rata. And that was what we had gone on based on that with the PUC. And now it's kind of being looked at again. So we'll see where it lands. And we'll obviously work through whatever eventuality. I will say, I know we're heading into the financials. The good news, since I haven't shared any, the good news
There was
is
a good employee lunch and a great net zero event.
well, the good financial news on top of those good news is that I think, and Emily's going to walk through some stuff in a few moments, but I think our FY22, when we review that with you, will be very strong performance. We've talked for such a long time about some of the metrics that we've wanted to improve and some of the, net income, operating income. I think you're going to see the results of the hard discussions that we had about needing to raise rates originally, and some of the other improvements that we've made are going to yield a really strong result for FY22. So I'm excited about that conversation pending the completion of the audited financials later this week. So that's just a preview. And then so far, despite these mystic charges, which are definitely an unbudgeted pressure, I'm excited about how we're doing in fiscal year 23 year to date, knowing that there's still that significant winter variable that could throw us off course or keep us on course for a strong outcome. But I think BED is in better financial position right now, based on everything that I've just mentioned, assuming that all holds, than we've been in a number of years, maybe dating back to 2017. So that's something that hopefully collectively we all can take pride in.
I know this isn't a good reason to be in a good financial position, but reduced staff, is that contributing?
Yeah, and frankly, vacancy savings is not insignificant. It's not something we've planned for, obviously, and not something we're looking to keep long term. But I think we're in a point now over the last couple of years where we've seen pretty regularly between 6 and 14 employees at any given time are going to be having a vacant position out of 119, 120. So yeah, there's some room to move there. And it's actually that plus our strong financial performance giving me, I think, the confidence to work with our team to put together a package that we're hoping to take to the city council in either late November or early December to add a few additional positions, knowing that we're not full at any given time and that we have a few acute needs that we'd like to address and we were going to address over a few years. And I think this is an opportunity to not do a wait and see, but to actually take some action to address some key challenges where we have, in one case, we have a situation where we might have some pending retirements, and getting a position filled early makes that transition easier. In other cases, I think we are continuing to focus on net zero, and we added the equity analyst position, the engineer position in energy services. There might be room to add another position that looks at some of the regulatory aspects. So this won't be an enormous increase in staff. I think we're talking 3 to 4. But for us, that's a big deal, particularly if we can get those positions hired, given the vacancy and turnover could stabilize things for us a little bit.
It's great to have the savings, but it's really taking a toll.
Yeah.
So I am worried about that.
Yep, I think we are challenged, and I think we have some longer term structural challenges that we have to address. We've tried to address a little bit with the city, but there are certain aspects of our package overall that we offer that are not as competitive as I would like them to be. Our vacation offering, for example, is not competitive with the marketplace. we've tried to address that a little bit with the city, with HR. I think that needs to be an ongoing conversation. We just changed our remote work policy. So we're now at a maximum 3 days a week in the office, 2 days remote, and that's the maximum. Some folks are 1 day, 4 days. Some folks are full time, in the office, and some folks have been that way throughout the pandemic because they are working in the field or working in a generation or have to be in dispatch. But we're competing with utilities that are offering up to 100% remote work in Vermont for some positions. So that change could change our competitiveness for certain positions, and that's something that is also a challenge.
What is the vacation policy compared to others?
I think for us, the default is that you come in and get 2 weeks. And I'm aware of others that are offering 3, 4, 5 weeks in some cases, or depending on your seniority, you might come in, with more if you were leaving a position with more. So that comes up in some of our recruiting conversations. I think Manir's, seen this, where folks are saying, hey, I have currently 4 weeks and the most we can offer is 2. Or in some cases 3, that ends up being a significant factor in recruitment.
2 plus sick?
Plus sick, that's correct.
And holidays, or just?
And holidays, yeah. So it's not, if you look at it overall, it's a little more competitive, but people, for whatever reason, they focus on that vacation time uniquely, and ends up being a challenge.
Well, the market's changed a lot too.
It has.
Well, and I mean, unfortunately, we're not alone with this challenge, but it doesn't make it any easier to bear through it.
So we'll continue to have those conversations, try to make improvements and be as competitive as possible. Yeah. But anyways, that was my segue to the great financials that you're about to hear about.
Yeah, I was just gonna say it's challenging. I feel like we've had a few situations now it is a very unique relationship, the Burlington Electric Department with the city, because I feel like we've now had at least 3 or 4 agreements that then it shifts, and it's very challenging to manage to a budget that way. But financials. Thank you, Emily.
Okay. So July, we're going to cover 2 months. So we're going to do a little catch up. First is July. Net loss for the month and the year of 1.1 million compared to budget and net loss of 446,000. So we did worse than budget. Key thing to note here was that we incorrectly recorded a $1 million rec purchase that we have subsequently fixed. It occurred in 2022. We've included it in 2022. We found this during the process of preparing the 2022 financial statements. So July expense here is overstated by $1 million. So actually, we came in better than budget. And you'll see it will have been, it was corrected in August. So when I get to August, the year to date will include the fix. So just be aware of that. But the sales to customers numbers are exactly what they are right there. Just pretty much on budget, only over by about $15,000. Miscellaneous revenues were under budget, mostly EEU. Power supply expense over budget by $1 million. That's where that rec purchase is hitting. Fuel was also over budget. McNeil production was higher than budget. We also had 21,000 of that Mystic natural gas ISO New England winter reliability charge hitting in July, and wind production was also over budget. And then O&M expense was favorable by almost $500,000, mostly just due to timing. In the tax row, similar theme to last year, the payment in lieu of taxes to the city was, the bill we received was less than what we had projected. So we're going to save $240,000 less than budget on the year. So every month you'll see a better than budget number there on the tax line. I'll just zoom down here to capital spending. Overall, 8% of budget. We made our budgeted Velco equity investment in July. So that's the big transmission, 91%. We have another small equity call coming in December. And then in the other capital plan areas, projects are taking place or not taking place, still experiencing a lot of supply chain delays that's affecting particularly the distribution area. Production, McNeil was running here, so they're in an outage now. So we'll see that budget, we'll see spending, bump up there in September and October. Cash position was 5.9 million as of July 31st. And then I'll say, let's not review these Moody's metrics. They're fine, but again, with the $1 million transaction in the wrong place, I'm gonna switch now to August.
Like, that's not what you were promising a minute ago.
Well, they're good for August too, but
Right.
at least they're good and it's right.
That's
right. Let me zoom in on this. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to foreclose. Are there any questions about July?
I think you can just go to.
Okay. Yes,
Yeah,
Bob.
You're no longer showing that pandemic impact graph. And when I look at
Correct.
the numbers, it looks like budget and actual use are pretty tight.
Yes, and I can just, so we all know what Bob's talking about. I think he's talking about, well, there's the total sales to customers, which for July, oh wait, which month am I in? I'm in August. Okay, so it's got both of them, right? So July, we're right about on budget. You can see August was a little bit better on budget for sales. And then we do the residential, right? For our FY23 budget, we sort of budgeted in this kind of COVID impact we've been seeing. So we budgeted residential like a little bit higher than we would have before the pandemic. And I don't think we changed commercial, actually. I don't think we budgeted for commercial to be lower. We just kind of followed the usual. So when you see residential higher than budget, just kind of have in your mind that that's like even better than the new normal COVID, residential. Does that make sense?
It's interesting though that you didn't change the commercial.
Huh?
It's interesting that you didn't change the commercial, because that's what I've heard from a city councilor, actually, that a lot of the commercial areas are sort of back to regular, whatever that means.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we certainly saw significant impacts in commercial, right, during the worst of the lockdown, but after that, they kind of bounced back a little more quickly. And, it's hard to shut a big building down like completely, right? So even if it wasn't fully occupied, I think as we've discussed before, it's still being climate controlled to some level, right? So.
And then the arrears is also, like, the collection issue is going away a little bit too?
I would, that's in your report.
I know it was in here. But
Yeah. It's better. It's not pre-pandemic level. We've started issuing, notices. Customer care has had some capacity issues, and so I don't know if we have actually done any disconnects yet, due to the sort of capacity issues related to kind of putting a door knocker on and kind of making that final step.
Don't we start to head into the winter when we can't?
Yes,
Yep.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
We can still give notice, we just don't shut off.
Right.
Yep.
Okay, so here's August. Let me make that a little bit bigger for you. Oh, I made it 4,000%, sorry.
We're not that blind.
I know. Sorry, guys. Hang on. Me and the touchpad of my computer are not really getting along right now. There we go. Okay. So sales to customers, generally on budget. Other revenues for the month also, where am I? Budget actual. Oh yeah, other revenues generally on budget. Power supply revenues, these are rec sales, rec revenues, $260,000 under budget. This is due to the lower wind and McNeil production that we saw last year, affecting rec sales in this year. Power supply expense was better than budget. Fuel was favorable. That's a portion of that $658,000 delta. McNeil was offline for part of the time, or production was less than budgeted. That was offset by an increase in the wood price that we made to secure adequate supply for the winter, which has been effective. The forestry team has been doing a great job. So we expect to have a full yard going into winter, but we are paying a bit extra per ton for the wood. Capacity was unfavorable by $100,000. We experienced $120,000 winter reliability charge for that Everett terminal in August. And purchase power was favorable, including the adjusting credit of the $1 million for the rec purchase. O&M was unfavorable by $182,000. Again, mostly timing. We're earlier in the year. And then gain loss. This is a favorable variance. That's also timing. So we're at overall, we did $197,000 better than budget. For the year, we're at a net income of $1.2 million compared to a budget of 1.7. So about 477 under budget. And then capital spending for August overall was 17%. So you can see some additional project spending happened in distribution, and IT Forward makes up a good portion of the general line. Again, timing of those is always a factor. August 31st, we were at $6.6 million in cash, which is 101 days. And here are the Moody's metrics for the 12 months ended in August, 3.88 on the debt service coverage and 1.09 on the adjusted debt service coverage. And you can see the 3-year averages there as well. Excuse me. Any other questions?
Nice to land the plane on empty or just a little
Never good if you like.
Well, yeah, thank you for your work.
You're welcome.
Bethany, you're staring deep.
No, I'm just looking through some of the data, yeah.
Any questions or comments? Yeah, some real surprises there. I mean, with the pay for this LNG and W, and then, yeah, the July, the 1 million. Yep. Although that's just numbers. Meaning it's not an inflow outflow anyway.
It was an outflow, but one that we wanted to make.
Right.
Yeah, it was favorable.
Not a surprise that we weren't planning for.
Right, it was favorable.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, and I'm looking forward to when we can get the FY22 full year numbers. I think you'll appreciate those as well.
That is the last item on the agenda. There's the commissioner's check-in, which is just our opportunity to loop back if anything else is remaining. Thank you, Emily. Well, I just have to say, I wish I could wave a magic wand so that you guys had some good, solid staff, and but I can't. So thank you for your work.
We have a good team.
Motion to adjourn. Yep. Second. All in favor?
Aye.